Hi and welcome. Anti-Islamic sentiment is on the rise across Europe and the United States. In the Netherlands, Sweden, France, Britain and Germany, debate is raging about immigration and the compatibility of Islam with Western values. The latest foiled terror plot originating in Yemen has done nothing to quell people's fears. In the United States, anti-Islamic sentiment is higher now than after the September 11 terror attacks. Recent polls show nearly half of Americans hold unfavourable views of Islam. So what's driving this increased hostility? That's what we're talking about tonight, and you can join us via Facebook and Twitter as well. Welcome everybody, good to have you all here. I'd like to start by going to the United States and to you, Reza Aslan, in Los Angeles. You're an American Muslim, you were born in Iran. Why do you think anti-Islamic sentiment is higher now than immediately after September 11? Is it related to these foiled terror plots, or is it something deeper than that?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for it. Certainly the economy plays a role in all of this. In times of economic distress, it's only natural for people, and Americans have done this for many years, to look for a scapegoat. And currently, depending on where you live in this country, the scapegoats are either, frankly, Mexicans or Muslims. So, you know, God save you if you happen to be a Mexican Muslim in America right now. I think also part of it has to do with a sense of war weariness in the United States. We've been involved in wars in the region for about 10 years. But I think that there's something important here that isn't talked about enough, and it's Barack Obama. 1/5 of Americans, 20%, believe that Barack Obama is himself a Muslim. And in fact, amongst Republicans, that number is almost 40%. Polls show in this country that the more you disagree with Barack Obama's domestic policies, the more likely you are to think that he's a Muslim. The reason I bring this up is because what's happened in the United States is something that's already happened in Europe, and that is that Islam has become otherized. It's become a kind of receptacle into which fears and anxieties about the political or economic situation, about the changing racial landscape of this country are being thrown. And this is something very common to the United States, make no mistake. In fact, every single thing that has been said about Muslims, that they're un-American, that they're foreign, that they're exotic, has been said in this country about Jews in the 20th century, was said about Catholics in this country in the latter part of the 19th century. So this is a common occurrence in the United States. And I think by all accounts, you know, in the same way that we look back on the anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish sentiments of our history with shame and derision and with a healthy dose of mockery, that's how we will very likely look back on this sort of anti-Muslim sentiment as well in the next generation.
Noni Darwish, you're joining us from LA too today. You were born in Egypt, you were raised a Muslim, you immigrated to America in the 70s where you converted to Christianity. What do you think in response to what Reza's saying, and what do you think is behind this anti-Islamic sentiment? Do you think it is just about fears of terrorism or something more?
It's much more, of course. The West is very concerned and actually afraid because the media is not informing them. There are too many moderate Muslims who are trying to whitewash the fears and concerns of the West. It's time for us to face reality. Nobody's against Muslims. When I'm speaking about this situation, it's about Islamic doctrine. Islamic doctrine promotes violence and hatred against non-Muslims. 60% of the Quran is dedicated to cursing and spreading hatred and violence against non-Muslims who are called kafir. The word kafir is not just non-Muslim. Kafir means that you know the truth about Islam and you deny it. And so it's a very derogatory word, and 60% of the Quran is dedicated to non-members of the religion. So Islam looks at the outside world in a very, they want to achieve conquering the world. Islam is more than a religion. It's much more than a religion. It's a way of life. It's a one-party political system that has a very elaborate legal system that can put you to death if you leave it.
All right, I'm going to stop you there, Noni, because I want to get some of our people involved here in Australia. And Sheikh Mohammed Nawaz Salim, I want to ask you the point that Noni makes about the Quran, 60% of it preaching hatred and violence. What's your response to that?
Even a non-Muslim who read the Quran would not say that. I met a Muslim psychologist who learned Quran for 10 years with these questions in his mind, whether God talks about God himself or whether God revealed this Quran. And he was unable to find anything that shows that Quran is 60% of the Quran is against non-Muslim, because Quran says that it is the rahmah, it is the blessings for alameen. It includes everyone. Now, how come a book that claims itself to be a blessings to the whole humanity address the non-Muslims in that derogatory term as Noni describes?
Okay, Randa, what's your view of this? I mean, you're an Australian Muslim, you were in the US recently. This does form part of the heart of this debate about whether the Quran preaches violence, about whether there is something intrinsically worrying at the centre of Islam. What's your response to that?
Well, when I was in the US, I felt that the discourse there surrounding Muslims as the other, problematizing Muslims and Islam as the other, was very similar to what we find in Australia, which is that the image of Islam is a constructed image in the West. We're starting from a point of view that Islam and Muslims, well, Islam is a violent, misogynistic, hateful religion, and that's where the debate always starts from. That presumption underlies the discourse. It's a discourse that sees nothing remotely beautiful or moral in Islam. We are plagued by a line of discourse that is utterly chaotic, it's ideologically charged, politically motivated. It makes sweeping generalizations about Muslims, as Noni has done, so that we're just one homogenous mass. So the religiously observant is lumped in with the nominal Muslim is lumped in with the radical. If we want to make sense of this mess and stop pushing Muslims into the arms of extremists, we need to make meaningful distinctions between the religion of Islam that a billion Muslims follow and see as a guidance for a peaceful, righteous, moral life, and the puritanical Islam of a minority, which so captures the media's attention. One thing I wanted to say about Noni is that with all due respect, I see her as the poster girl of Islamophobic cash cow, because really people like that are allowed to assume a heroic status as somehow, you know, escaping Islam and living to tell the tale, that they are the sort of the religious whistleblowers on Islam, precisely because there is this constructed image of Islam as a hateful religion.
All right, I'll get a response from Noni to that. Noni?
There is no need to any whistleblower. I mean, the Quran is there. We don't need a genius. You don't need to be a genius or a great thinker to read those verses. For example, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُم مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ تَرْهِبُونَ بِهِمْ عَدُوَّكُمْ. I mean, what? It's promoting terrorism.
Can you translate? Noni, you'll have to translate that for a lot of the people listening at home.
Yes,
what does it say?
It's a verse in the Quran that tells Muslims to prepare every effort and everything and to use the horses of war and spread terrorism against non-Muslims.
Okay, I'll get a response. I'll get a response from Reza about this.
It's all over the Quran. It's all over the Quran.
All right, Reza, your response to that, to what is in the Quran?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's a weird feeling to have to respond to a Christian leader of an anti-Muslim organization. It would be like having to respond to a Muslim leader of an anti-Jewish organization about Judaism. So the whole thing is kind of weird. But let me just say that it's kind of convenient to simply pick and choose whatever violent bits and pieces one finds in the Quran and ignore the equally important verses that talk about compassion and peace. There's nothing strange or unusual about the Quran. The same Torah that gives us the 10 Commandments also commands the Jews to enact genocide upon every non-believer of Yahweh. The same gospel that tells us to turn the other cheek also says, Jesus says that I've come to bring the sword and not peace, and that he who doesn't have a cloak should sell his cloak and sell and buy a sword. The thing about Scripture is that it always talks about war and peace, love and hatred, compassion and bigotry. That's why it's important. That's why something that was written 5,000 years ago is still read today, because it could be understood however you want to. Only an ideologue or a bigot would choose to only focus on one part of Scripture and ignore the other parts.
Okay, I'd like to get a feel from some non-Muslims in the audience here about how they view Islam, because I'd like to get a sense of that from some of the people here. Marco, what do you understand about Islam?
I'm born and raised in Egypt as a Christian. So the problem is it doesn't give me comfort in knowing that when they're getting taught from a young age is that to hate specifically Christian and Jews, or doesn't give me comfort in knowing that they basically memorizing in the Quran how to fight me till I believe or else.
Okay, Amrish, what about you? You're a Sikh. What's your view?
Well, I believe that, religion is an institution. There are good and bad things about all institutions. I think Islam is based on some fundamental principles, and they are open to interpretation. Like even within the Sikh religion, we have this debate of, shorn hair or unshorn hair. People that cut their hair are not Sikhs. Who am I to define that? I think it is the choice of that individual.
Okay, I want to get some other comments. Ray, what do you think? Yeah.
Actually, I am a Jew, and because of that, my history goes back many thousands of years. But the history of Judaism is the enlightenment of what happens with people who are looking beyond primitive values. If we tend to go back and regress towards primitive values, which in some cases Islam can represent, not necessarily does, but it can represent, we are regressing back to primitive situations, which is not called for in society.
Okay. Judith, yes. What's your feeling about this? What do you understand about Islam, and how compatible do you think Islamic values are with
I think in Australia they are compatible, and I think we have to see Australia as quite different, certainly from Europe and different from England. And I know a lot of English people that I come across now who have just moved out here in the last couple of years tend to say, oh, it's really nice to come to the North Shore area and not be surrounded by people in burqas or dark-skinned people. It's wonderful. And you have to say, look, don't bring that baggage with you. Multiculturalism is working extremely well here. And so you must leave that behind, see where Australia sits geographically as opposed to where England sits geographically, and say this is a totally different situation here.
Right?
Australia is a very young country, 200 years old, and most of the people that make up Australia have come from other places. And over those 200 years we've had a very peaceful existence in Australia because everyone has a tolerant attitude to new ideas and to different ideals. But we have one main ideal, which is the strength of a democracy. And because we have this democracy, we allow diverse attitudes and ideas to be espoused. And may I say that just the fact that we have an SBS broadcasting system which allows those ideas to be promoted throughout the nation is fantastic. And that the more we know about other people and beliefs, the better it is for Australia.
Okay, we didn't set that up either.